We are going to take a look at 3 different products that I recently received, and as I was reviewing these products, I realized how amazingly these would work together to create some awesome adventures. So let's get started. Welcome to Solitary RPG. White Box Cyclopedia is a game inspired by the original Dungeons and Dragons White Box game. This is something I have been interested in exploring and learning more about. I have PDFs of the original White Box, and if you've ever read them, they're not the best rules system out there. It's almost a game that you have to have experienced at some point, and then you have a better understanding of the rules. In this book, what the author has done is taken those original rules, made some changes to them to kind of modernize them a little bit, and kind of kept the spirit of the original version of Dungeons and Dragons alive in this book. And this way, you can still experience White Box, but it's a lot easier to play the game because you'll have a better understanding of the rules by going through this. It's a pretty thick book. It's got a lot of information in it. However, it provides a lot of supporting material to the original version of the game with more options and character types and all the information just to give it a better experience. When you open it up, you have a foreword from Matt Finch, who also wrote a retro clone called Sword and Wizardry. And he kind of explains a little bit about the history of White Box, some of the challenges that it had, and just explains how this is just a good retro clone if you are interested in playing the original Dungeons and Dragons. And then the author also writes a short introduction to the rules and kind of continues on with that information. It's important to read that foreword and the introductions before you jump into the rules so you just have a better understanding of where the author's coming from and a little bit about how they set up the book. Now, one of the reasons I am interested in the White Box system is its dice mechanics. It just uses a d20 and also d6s. That's it. So this gives me an opportunity to pull out my Didact d20s, the original dice for Dungeons and Dragons. We did not have d20s that went 1 through 20. We had these d20s that went from 0 through 9 2 different times with different colors. That's all they had available. And obviously, there were a lot of d6 available when Dungeons and Dragons came out. But as you go through this, you'll see the table of contents, and there's quite a bit of information. And this book goes up to 287 pages. However, most of the information in here is going to be your monsters, your spells, and your character types. The rules themselves do not consist of many pages. One of the criticisms of the White Box rule system was that it wasn't very organized, and I feel it was probably not well organized because the original authors of Dungeons and Dragons were introducing a whole new game system to the market, and they just didn't have any other games to look at to help guide them in how to present their information. So they were presenting it from the point of view of people that were already playing the game, and they did their best at the time. So that's why the original White Box is a little bit disorganized. Also, art assets, the original D&D art assets were not the greatest. Kind of set the standard for being able to present a rule system and not having professional art in it. But it was more of just a issue of time and money to be able to put in better art. So they did the best they could with what they had. And I feel they kept that part of White Box alive in the White Box Cyclopedia, because you'll flip through it and you will see some of the art is going to have that vibe of very old school Dungeons and Dragons. It might look really nice on some pages, but a little bit more on the amateur side on some of the other pages, and you'll notice that as we're flipping through the rule book. Also with the organization, when you go to create your character, you'll go through the steps of creating your character, but you're not going to create your whole character. Some of the information is found later in the actual rules on how to finish out your character. Don't know if that was done intentionally to keep a little bit of that spirit disorganization of the original book alive. So as we flip through, you're going to jump into what White Box Cyclopedia is, and then you're going to get into your character creation, talking about all the different abilities. And here are the optional rules. So they're all boxed out, and you can either choose to use these rules or not use these rules. And this is one of the main points of White Box Cyclopedia. The original Dungeons and Dragons was designed as core rules, and it was up to the referee and the players to house rule the system and create their own game. And that is one of the things that made it a little bit more unique, is it was helping you or giving you guidance for creating your own system, your own game that you're going to play with your friends at your table. Same thing is being done here with these optional rules. You'll sit down with your group, you'll go over like the core rules, and then if everybody agrees, the referee primarily, of using the optional rules, you can do so. And you're going to create your own game at the table, your own world, your own setting, everything like that. And I just like that. I just think that is something that for a solo player is going to give me a lot of opportunity to decide and explore different rules. And that's one of the reasons why I backed this on Kickstarter, and I'm happy to have received it. But you're going to go over all the information on the stats and hit points and your starting gold. And then you'll jump into chapter 2. For this game system, they used heritage as another word to explain race. I'm just going to call it character type because that makes more sense in my mind of what chapter 2 is about. Then you're going to get a little bit of information about some of the original rules and how they only had certain character types that you can choose from. But the book's going to then expand into all kinds of different character types that you can choose from with your dwarfs and your elves and your halflings and your humans. And this is where they kind of modernized it to take in expansion material, other character types that were house ruled over the years to incorporate into White Box, and just give you a very expansive amount of character types you can choose from. You're going to have some optional rules for each of the character types, their requirements in order to play them, and some of their character type abilities and things like that. And this is where you really kind of start creating your character. There's a chart here that talks about each of the different character types and what classes they can play and some of their restrictions. So you have kind of a quick reference for all the different character types that you can play and the classes. And that's what chapter 3 is about, are the different classes you can play. Each class will give you the experience chart and some of the restrictions for playing those classes. And if there's spells and things like that, you have your fighter, you have your magic user, but then it expands it further than that, giving you, again, classes that were part of expansion materials and house ruled over the years and kind of accepted in the white box community as good information. And that is something, again, talked about in the forward, where at the time, expansion material for white box like Blackmore were put out, but they weren't heavily playtested. Well, since then, they've been playtested and modified and changed, house ruled, and as a community of people that are playing just pure white box, they've taken some of that information and incorporated it into this rule book. So it is a cyclopedia of information just about white box. One of the things I like about what they did with the classes is they've created classes based on your character type. It's almost a little bit like multi-classing. So on page 81, heritage as class, I chose a dwarf battle priest, and this is going to be a dwarf that is a mixture of a cleric and also a fighter, so give me a lot of different abilities. And I thought this was important for solo play because that will help me have other options when I'm playing. I just really liked it, so that's why I chose it, but it gives me all of my information. So if you do play one of these classes, you have to have permission from your referee, which since I'm playing solo, I'm my own referee. And I chose to use it, and then you can use one of those. But you just have a few different ones in here. I will say this book was not designed like many of the modern RPG books where everything's on one spread. It is kind of just all blended together into the book, going just in order. And what I had to do for my dwarf battle priest, because I got the PDF of this as well, is I printed off my pages, all the information, and kind of created this little cheat sheet because they do have a lot of information. This way I don't have to go back into the book to look up my information. I don't forget it. When I'm playing, I can just use that as a reference sheet. I did find that helpful, but it's not all on one spread, which is fine. I like everything being on a spread, but it's not necessary. I have ways around that, and I just use my creativity. So the first 92 pages really just cover creating your character for the most part, not everything for your character, and gives you your character types and also your classes. Then you get into chapter 4, which is going to get into all of the equipment that you can purchase for your character and give you some information about the equipment and some optional rules. And it's just has a lot of information, but there's not a lot of reading for the game itself, especially for the rules. I believe there's only 13 pages of rules for this game in this book. If you're just playing the core game, you don't necessarily need to read the information about the strongholds if you're not playing with the strongholds, especially if you're just starting out. Your character's probably not going to have a stronghold. You can also become a knight, and it talks about all of that. So taking information, I don't know if this is necessarily information that is used in the white box community. I would make that assumption because it's in the Cyclopedia. However, it's just additional information that was not in the original game. It's been added into here, and there's a whole process for becoming a knight. So if you really want to explore that, you would want to read this information. However, if you are not interested in that, you can skip that information. Chapter 5 is going to be all about the gameplay, the important information, but there's just not a lot to it. And that is why I kind of enjoy this. It's going to give me an opportunity to make my own house rules and create my own solo experience using the information in the book, the optional rules, and also all the tools that have been created over the years, and we'll talk about some of those that will help with the game. So chapter 5 is just going to go over those rules, and this is where you will finish out your character. So when I was creating my character, I rolled up my stats, I used different optional rules, and some of the information that I needed wasn't here, mainly my armor class. I couldn't find that in my character creation, but as you go through the actual rules, you'll find out about armor class and how that is determined. Basically, everybody starts at armor class 10, and then if you have armor or a shield, those are going to give you bonuses to that number, and that is how you create your armor class. Because I've never played the original White Box, I don't know if the combat rules are a modification to the original rules, but this just follows when you're in combat, you roll your d20 and you have to meet or beat the armor class of the opponent. If you do, then you hit and you roll damage. Pretty 5e kind of rules. Then we're just going to get into, optional rules. You can splinter your shield, death's door. So these are like saving throws. So optional rules just are added to the game and you just decide if you're going to use them. But the core rules are just written out like a typical rule book. You've got your saving throws, traps, things like that. Then we're going to get into wilderness exploration, kind of your hex crawl, which is something that I really like, and it's got information about how to conduct a hex crawl and taking your adventure on the open sea. So if you want to do a water adventure, there's lots of rules, but they're not necessary to read if you're not going to be doing that. So you don't have to really understand every aspect of this rule book. You just need to understand the core to get started, which there's not a lot of rules for the core. And then you can add in those additional rules as you're playing, or maybe if something comes up, there are some optional rules. You can look at those. A great example of how to play the game, which is always good because you can kind of get a sense of how everything is going. White Box Cyclopedia, the referee controls the table. Yes, they want to work with their players so everybody has a positive experience playing the game. However, they have final word, and they are the ones that would make those decisions. Chapter 6 is going to get into magic, and this is going to be all the magic spells, how to cast them, and what effects they have in the game. And then you're going to get into some GM advice running the game. It's good advice. I did enjoy reading it, really talking about how the referee is running the game. They have a lot of responsibilities. I don't think people realize how much responsibility the referee has when running an RPG. Might be one of the reasons we have such a shortage, because it's not easy work and it does take time to really develop those skills to run a game. Also references that you're not telling a story. You're not writing everything out. You're not writing a book. You're just kind of responding to what your players are doing and creating the obstacles along the way for their game. But you have just really good referee advice. And then you just get into kind of different styles of games that, if you're wanting to run them, kind of giving you some ideas on how to run them. Chapter 8 is going to be your bestiary. This is going to give you information on how you create your encounters for your game and their hit dice and their attack bonuses and experience gain. But you have all your monster types that you can encounter on your adventures with their stats and their information that you'll need. And then chapter 9 goes into treasure and how to generate the treasure and different types of treasures, especially magical weapons or magical treasures that they can find. And that's pretty much how you end the book. The very back of it has the character sheet. Not fancy, not exciting, but that's okay. This just gives you the information you need so you can play your character. And one of the points in this game is you're not playing your character sheet, you are playing an actual character and you're responding to them. It's not about looking for these amazing combinations on your character sheet to make you very strong and powerful. That's pretty much everything I have to say about White Box Cyclopedia and everything that it has to offer. I do want to jump into this. This is why I've already created a character and explore this experience of playing kind of a modern version of the original Dungeons and Dragons with all the expansion material and everything right here at my fingertips, so I don't have to track down a bunch of different information on websites and blogs and things like that. I don't have to take a lot of time researching the game. It's all in one place and I can play it. Moving on from White Box Cyclopedia, we're going to talk about the Hexploration kit. This was another Kickstarter that I backed. The product arrived. What I like about this particular product was not necessarily I got a bunch of cards that I can use for different locations, but it was the hex map tiles that really caught my attention. There's been some other videos. Geek Gamer did a few different videos on this. That's how I was exposed to it, watching one of her videos, and decided to back it. Real quickly, I will go over it. You have all of these decks of cards that represent different regions that you can explore based on where your characters are adventuring. And they give you a bunch of site locations that have some charts that you can roll on to generate some interest in those different sites. I'm just going to take a look at these settled lands. One of the things I liked about the rules in White Box Cyclopedia for their overland adventure is you start at a location and then you start adventuring from there into the open wilds. And this will allow me to create my starting location very easily. And all you do is you open up your deck, you get all your cards. The first card is just going to be some instructions, but it's this art that really captured my attention. You just find one that you either like, or you can just pull one randomly. And once you pull your settlement location, you can flip the card around. You have some charts you can roll on to create some interest in that location. And then you can take it further, because at the very back of the decks, there's all these other charts that you can roll on to continue creating interest in that settlement, to just bring it to life. And it's all card based, which is really nice. And I just like it. I really just fell in love with the art that was created for these cards. They open up my imagination and it gives me something I can visually look at to help create that interest in that location. It's just something I just enjoyed, and that's why I picked it up and I backed it and supported the content creator, which these were put out by Inkwell Ideas. I don't know if this is something that's going to make it to market or not, but these are just really neat, and I just really enjoyed getting them in the mail. And I spent hours just kind of flipping through these, looking at all the different arts. But you have settled lands on the high seas, so if you want to do an adventure in the ocean, you can. You have strange places. You have the underrealms, which would be, settlement locations underground, and then into the wilderness. But these are really just creating settlement locations or points of interest where you're going to be exploring. And I found them really nice. This part, though, the map tiles, is really what kind of got me excited, because this is a little hex system that you can use to create your map on the table. So instead of having a piece of hex paper out and having to draw on the hex paper or block out the regions on the hex paper, you can just lay down these tiles on your table and you can just focus on this particular tile, and then as you explore you can just add other tiles to it. There's a variety of different ones with woods, weird mushrooms, and mountains and desert and all that good stuff that you would normally come across in an adventure. What's really nice about these is they have a very glossy finish to them and feel like almost like thin plastic, and you can use a dry erase marker on these to write out certain things, draw things, do whatever you want on them, and then just wipe them clean. And it also came with these kind of static cling type images that you can peel off, put on your map to indicate the location your adventurers are traveling to. And there's also water features, so if you want to create maybe an ocean front or a river going through your spot. But these are just static clings, so they're reusable, they're not going to destroy your tiles, and just adds a little bit of more of that visual appeal quickly at the table, so you're not having to stop and draw something out, things like that. When I was going over this product and also reading the rules for White Box Cyclopedia, it really kind of helped me solidify how these will work beautifully with that rule system. The Overland Adventure rules for White Box Cyclopedia states that each hex is 10 miles. Don't know when or at what point in the gaming sphere that we came up with the concept that a hex was 6 miles, but the rules do state that it's 10 miles and it takes a party a day to cross one hex. So when I'm playing that system, I just have to have one hex out. If we're traveling to a location, let's say the location is 5 miles away, I can have 2 hexes out. We have our starting settlement, which we generated using the cards. We start our adventure and then we go to our next settlement or point of interest on our adventure, and each one of these would represent a day, and you would just go through the process in the rule books for, finding resources or rations and having encounters and things that you'll discover along the way. And that's pretty much it. But I don't have to have this big huge map out. I've got these gorgeous cards. I can use a dry erase marker, especially if I don't want to use the static clean images. I can just use, dry erase marker and just make notes on the cards as I'm playing. And then when I'm done, I can erase them. Can also transfer this information into a hex map. And then I can start a campaign of going out adventuring. And when I saw Geek Gamer talking about these and sharing the concept behind them, I just felt that it was something that was different enough that I wanted to add it to my collection, and it provided me a better way of playing my games, and that is why I have these now. And they just give you a lot of different settlement locations and a way of mapping that you can use for any game, but I really feel it's going to be helpful when I am playing White Box Cyclopedia. The next product I'm going to talk about are the Outdoor Encounter cards by Philip Reed. Philip Reed puts out a lot of amazing products, and I have known about the Outdoor Encounter cards for a long time. Never picked them up. I finally pulled the trigger after a comment was left on one of my videos asking me to review them. The Outdoor Encounter decks are just cards you're going to be able to pull from. They are system neutral. They have some amazing art on each one of them, which is very reminiscent of old school gaming. It's just black and white pencil drawings. I really just felt these would work nicely with White Box Cyclopedia. Basically, the way the rules work in the book is you're going to be traveling to another site or location depending on how many hexes you travel. If you roll that number or lower, you have a random encounter. So if I'm just traveling 3 hexes, if I roll my dice, I got a 1. So I would have one of these random encounters. There's a table in there for that you'd roll on for the type of encounter, and I can just look through these for those types of encounters, or I can house rule it. And that's what I like about White Box Cyclopedia, and the philosophy behind it is I can just pick one of these randomly. Also, I do not have to roll on the chart in the rule book, and I can just pick one of these random encounters, and that is what I would come across. But yes, there are 4 different decks for the Outdoor Encounters by Philip Reed. They're just really nice cards with artwork and flavor text, and Philip Reed's flavor text is just fun to read. And I finally pulled the trigger and picked all of these up for my collection. Now I just need to figure out how I want to use them. I could break these down to match the chart in White Box Cyclopedia. So if I do have a monster encounter, I could pull all the cards out for monster encounters and put those separately and just pull from that deck. Or I could just house rule the mechanics and just decide on my own what I'm going to come across. So that's just a real quick look at the Outdoor Encounter cards that I've added to my collection of cards in my games. I do like using cards in RPG games. They're just simple. They don't take up a lot of room on my table, and I can just have them in a box, set them off to the side. When I need them, I pull that resource in, pull the card out that I need, I push them back off to the side, and now I just have a single card on my table with the information that I need, and I'm done. And that's why I enjoy using them. I'm probably going to end up sleeving all of these and just putting them in their own separate little box. That way I can protect them. These were ordered through Drive-Thru Card, and they weren't inexpensive. The cost of printing at Drive-Thru RPG and Drive-Thru Cards have gone up, and I just don't want to damage them, especially because of the way I play. I play outside, and sometimes the wind comes along and blows all my stuff onto the ground, so I don't want them to get dirty or damaged. That was a look of these 3 different products, and kind of how I'm really interested in going back to original Dungeons and Dragons. However, adding more modern gaming mechanics to the game and resources that were not available when original Dungeons and Dragons came out. I like the philosophy that the author talks about in this book, that the rules weren't really meant to cover every aspect of gaming. It was the table, the people playing, that were creating new rules to incorporate in their game, and while doing so, playtesting those rules to kind of create their own gaming system. A great example of that philosophy would be Shadow Dark. Shadow Dark is a blending of the philosophy of old school gaming blended in with 5th edition, where the author played the game, modified some rules, added new things, kind of brought in that old school philosophy, and then created their own rule system. That is what this book can offer you. Here are some basic rules. Play it, add things, use some of the optional rules, and kind of create your own game that you and your friends can enjoy. And at the end of the day, that is what RPGs are all about. It's not about creating something to publish to make money off of. It's really about creating something that you and your friends can enjoy at your table, and your house rules are your agreed upon rules on how you're going to conduct your games at your table with your friends. And since I play solo, I get to have those conversations with myself using tools that are now readily available that were never available during the creations of Dungeons and Dragons, pulling in some of those modern tools, creating my own way of playing at the table, and just enjoying my adventures. Thank you for watching and have a great day. Bye.